This is the update that I have been waiting for. Hello and welcome, or welcome back to my channel. If you don't know me, my name is Nina. I am a certified life coach. On this channel, I talk about things Crohn's disease related, coaching related, personal development related. I just finished my series. I didn't just finish my series, but the last series of videos that I posted was my 12 Days of Wellnessmas series. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you tuned in along on the journey, I really appreciate those who reached out to say that you were really enjoying the series. It was definitely something that I was really excited to put together and to put out there. But I filmed all of that back in November, and I haven't filmed anything since then. So I haven't filmed in like 2 months, and that is the longest that I've gone without filming myself for one channel or another for over 3 years. So forgive me if I'm a little rusty here, but I'm super excited to talk about what I am here to talk about today, and that is an update in my Crohn's disease journey and my treatment plan. Previously on this channel, I've talked about my Crohn's disease at length. I feel like I went through the entire story of the process to my diagnosis, my first year of treatment. The last update that I posted along those lines was not a super happy one. It was frustrating, it was sad. It was after a 3-month battle of trying to get insurance to approve a biologic for me, and that ended up not happening, and I was put on azathioprine as my treatment approach at that point. I was not super enthused about being on azathioprine. It wasn't what my doctor had originally wanted for me. From what I had been looking into, with what I could find and interpret available to me on the internet in terms of Crohn's disease treatment approaches, it did not seem like the best course of action for me. So I'm not gonna lie, I was a pretty negative Nancy going into that experience. I was not happy with having to do that, but I tried to put my feelings aside as much as I could to open up some room for the possibility that azathioprine could work for me and that I could start to see improvements with my Crohn's disease. And I don't know how much of it was mental, manifesting, whatever, but I only got worse on azathioprine. My symptoms did not let up whatsoever, and I started to observe some concerning things in general popping up after going on azathioprine. And it's not to say that necessarily the azathioprine was causing these things, but there were certain things that were concerning to be popping up in correlation to me starting this new drug. And my doctor also had to give some room, give some time for the azathioprine to perhaps take a positive effect on me and begin to lessen my symptoms and maybe initiate remission for me. So I started azathioprine at the end of August. I had blood work done about 2.5 weeks after that, and then I had a follow-up appointment, and I was like, nothing's really changing, going well, maybe a little bit worse, right? And then I was like, okay, let's wait it out. Let's up the dose to see if it starts taking better effect. And with every follow-up appointment, that was the course of action. Go in after maybe 3 weeks, do some blood work, up the dose because it wasn't really working for me. So I started at, I think, 50 milligrams, and I'd gone up to 200 by the end of October, November-ish. And November was the most difficult time in the history of my Crohn's disease. My Crohn's symptoms have tended to be in the past like year or so much more upper GI based. I haven't been having any really concerning like bowel movements, but I have been having a lot of nausea, dizziness, fatigue, weakness, also like accompanying extra-intestinal symptoms like dry eyes and joint pain. But as the weeks and months crept on after getting on azathioprine, my nausea just slowly started turning up and up and up to the point that like by October, the only thing that was keeping me from throwing up on a moment-to-moment basis was sheer willpower and mental fortitude. And by November, I was throwing up on a multi-times per week basis. And nothing necessarily would like trigger the vomiting. It was pretty much just a matter of like the nausea eventually breaking down my willpower and fortitude and me finally allowing myself to go to the bathroom or throw up. Or sometimes it would be like I would just be puttering around. What was happening a lot in like October was that I would be like retching and gagging and on the verge of throwing up just pretty much out of nowhere, just like puttering around, living my life, and like my esophagus was like spasming or something. I would just be like gagging and retching. And then by the time that November rolled around, sometimes that would happen. Like I would be like gagging, retching, and every once in a while a little bit would come out. And sometimes it was just a matter of like making a decision, like, okay, I am dealing with really terrible nausea right now, and I think it would be a good idea for me to go ahead and throw up. And it was just, I didn't have to like put my fingers down my throat or anything. It was just like making the decision, going to the bathroom, putting my head in the bowl, and going to town. And when I first started throwing up, it also was like pretty concerning to me because I was throwing up on an empty stomach. And so it was like pure green, like lime, neon stomach acid or bile or something. So after the first time that happened, I reached out to my doctor over my patient portal, and she sent in a prescription for me for this pretty heavy duty nausea medication called Zofran. And that didn't really fully do the trick. I would like try to power through as much as possible because I mean, if you've ever taken Zofran, you know that it causes like pretty intense constipation. That for me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, but it would help if there was like something that I just needed to get through, and I would prefer to be like as high functioning as possible. And believe it or not, once my Crohn's escalated to this point of throwing up on a frequent basis, I actually got pretty excited. And I'll tell you why. Like I said, I was not super pumped about taking azathioprine. I just knew it was not the best treatment option, and I knew that the longer that I stayed on this medication, the more the risk factors would compound and increase. I went to the dermatologist because some of my moles were growing in a concerning way, and my dermatologist was like, yeah, I would be so much more comfortable if you were on a biologic as opposed to azathioprine, considering the ways that these are growing and the risk factors associated with azathioprine. And I just like really wished that I could be on a biologic. That's what I wanted for myself. That's what my doctors wanted for me. But my insurance would not approve any biologic for me until I had tried and failed an immunosuppressant like azathioprine. So when I started throwing up, I was like, I'm failing the azathioprine. It's not working for me. This seems to be some concrete evidence to potentially move me up to the biologic. And so when I started throwing up and when I got the Zofran prescription, I was about like 2 weeks out from a follow-up appointment with my GI. And I'll tell you, I was so heckin' hyped for that appointment. I was like, this is it. And it was. Once I got in there and we talked about my symptoms, we talked about how I was getting worse on the azathioprine, she was like, cut that shit out. Just stop taking it. I was like, do I need to step down from it or wean off of it? And she's like, nope, just stop cold turkey. And from that point, the plan moving forward was to scope me, get some imaging done, to be able to present to my insurance to ask that they approve a biologic for me. So fortunately, I was able to get a colonoscopy endoscopy booked less than a week from the point where I had that appointment with my GI. And then she also ordered an MRI for me that I did about a week after my colonoscopy endoscopy. So I was super excited to be able to knock that out, but I'm not gonna lie, even though a week is not a very long time, leading up to those procedures, I was in quite a mental state because I had never felt worse. It's funny because I actually got my colonoscopy endoscopy on Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Week. Pretty ironic. And I was like joking to everyone that I told, like, it's so ironic because I have never been more aware of my Crohn's. I was down bad and I was concerned. I was frightened with considering the level of symptoms that I was experiencing, what they would find when they would get in there. At this point, I'd had active Crohn's for over 2 years without it ever being properly treated. So I was concerned about the toll that that would have taken on my body at this point. But on the other side of the coin, I was also concerned that I was being a drama queen, that all of my symptoms were me overreacting in my head, and when they got in there, they wouldn't actually find anything concerning enough to motivate my insurance to approve a biologic for me. So like going into my colonoscopy, I was framed as all heck of like those two opposing scenarios. I was like, am I going to wake up from this colonoscopy and they're gonna tell me everything is fine, you're being a baby, shut up, go home, suck it up, you faker? Or am I gonna wake up from this colonoscopy and am I going to need to book a surgery date? Am I immediately gonna be taken to the emergency room to get a dose of steroids? What is gonna happen? And fortunately, after my colonoscopy, I got the perfect middle Goldilocks scenario. The last time that I had been scoped, I had had a colonoscopy in March of 2022 and a capsule endoscopy in May of 2022. And those were the tests that found and confirmed moderate severe Crohn's disease in my terminal ileum, with some disease in my colon and some disease in my duodenum. But majorly, the terminal ileum was where it was at, which is pretty common for Crohn's disease. That's where it likes to hang out the most. And that's exactly what they found in my colonoscopy, but so much worse. Like, I don't know why I have this like deep feminine urge to show people my colonoscopy pictures. No one wants to see that. No one wants to see the inside of someone's intestines, period, probably, but you definitely don't want to look inside of mine. But I have this urge to like show them, like anyone that I talk to about this, I'm like, you want to see the pictures? And they're like, no. And I was like, I know, I was just kidding. But I don't know, it's like such a crazy thing to have an invisible illness and then to have proof in front of you of what that invisible illness actually looks like on the inside, even though nobody can see it on your outside. But yeah, it was looking really gnarly up in there. Mostly, of course, in my terminal ileum and also in my ileocecal valve, which those two are like right next to each other, the very end of the small intestine and leading into the large intestine. So what made it like so much worse? There was more ulcerations, more inflammation, more erosion. There was like a special word for it, like erythema. It was bleeding in a pretty gnarly way. It was also narrowing, which was explaining my increase in nausea and my onset of vomiting, because my intestine was just starting to narrow and it was becoming harder for things to move through it. And when the intestine narrows in Crohn's or colitis, it's called stricturing. And there are two types of stricturing. There's stricturing due to inflammation, and there's stricturing due to scar tissue. Now, with stricturing due to inflammation, that is something that is reversible with medication, but with stricturing due to scar tissue, that is only reversible with surgery in one form or another. Whether it is removing that part of the intestine or whether it is doing some like special scope plasty of some sort of kind, I don't know. That's my understanding. And the cause of stricturing because of scar tissue or scar tissue in general is just the repeated process of inflammation and healing and forming that scarring on the intestinal walls. Now, the stricturing was pretty mild, fortunately. There was some stricturing due to scar tissue, but most of the stricturing was due to inflammation, but hopefully nothing that will cause long-term effects or that isn't reversible to a certain degree or needs surgical intervention at least any time in the immediate future. So it was great. That was my Goldilocks scenario. I didn't need to walk away from that procedure with any steroids. I didn't need to go to the ER. I was just sent on my merry way with now a whole new batch of worsening physical proof to show to my insurance that I had failed azathioprine and that it was medically necessary for me to get on some biologics. Now, what happens when you go into a colonoscopy, whether it is a routine colonoscopy or whether it is a investigative colonoscopy, is that they will take biopsies of your gut lining to really examine the level of inflammation that exists in there. And my intestine was like really sensitive. It was like bleeding at just a touch. And so when I got home, I was having a bad time. You know, if you've ever done a colonoscopy prep, you know that the prep is not fun at all. You are inducing watery diarrhea in yourself to clean out your intestines. And this was like my third colonoscopy already. I already knew the gist was that when you go home from your colonoscopy, you're still going to be having some of those prep poops, if you will. You're still going to be having some of that watery diarrhea. And I was, and there was a lot of blood coming out of me as well. It looked like, how graphic do I want to get? It's always nice to know like what is normal and what is abnormal. I got a little like discharge sheet that said, you know, go to the emergency room if these things happen and call the office if these things happen. And one of the things was like, call the office if you are seeing blood in your stool more than just from wiping. If you are a menstrual cup user, the amount of blood that I was seeing in my bowel movements was equivalent to what you would find in like menstrual cup after like 12 hours of use. So a lot. So I called the office and I was like, yeah, I'm just calling. I honestly wasn't too worried about it because like, I just wasn't. This is just my life. I was just like, yeah, I just thought that I should like call because it said to call if this happens and like this is the amount. And basically the on-call doctor just told me like, looking at your colonoscopy pictures, I would be surprised if you weren't bleeding this amount, but just wait it out, and if it's still going on by the next morning, then go to the emergency room. Fortunately, it wrapped up by the next morning, and so I was good to go. Now, I still had to do my MRI, and maybe you're wondering, because this is what I certainly was wondering, you know, they found good and plenty in my colonoscopy. What is an MRI going to show that a colonoscopy wouldn't? And basically, your intestinal tract is really long, and even doing a colonoscopy and an endoscopy, they don't cover all of the length of your intestine, and also it can maybe like get a better look at some inflammation or stricturing, or identify other complications like abscesses or fistulas. I don't know. I am just a person with Crohn's disease. I am not a doctor. So the next step was to get an MRI to cover all of our bases. That was a really difficult process when it came to scheduling and insurance and approval. It was all happening around Mercury retrograde, so maybe that had something to do with it. So I was having an abdomen pelvis MRI. The process for that was I had to arrive like 90 minutes before my appointment time. I just sit in the waiting room and drink 3 bottles of, the drink didn't taste bad. Like, it wasn't chalky. It was like a little like lemony lime hinted flavored water. So it wasn't so bad, except for the fact that it was like frozen, like freezing cold. There was chunks of ice in it. And this is like middle of December. I'm freezing drinking it. And it was extremely, extremely sugary. And it ran right through me. It felt like immediate fast-acting colonoscopy prep. It was pretty brutal. And, when you're doing a colonoscopy prep, you're in the comfort of your own home. And here I was just like in the waiting room, running back and forth to the bathroom. So that was not pleasant. Then closer to my appointment time, I got put into a room with a little locker to put my things in, got into some scrubs, got taken back to put like the IV, is the word cannula in? Basically like the needle with the attaching thing where they would put another thing to run the contrast through me. And I was getting an MRI without contrast first and then with contrast. I don't know why. I don't know what those things do. And the process from like getting taken into like the room with the scrubs and the locker to getting into the MRI machine moved very, very quickly, which was nice because I was like very, very concerned about shitting my pants. But what's cool is that once you get into the MRI machine, they put something in your IV. They like inject it with like sugar to basically stop your digestive system from acting. I don't know. Maybe the glucose is like, okay, pancreas, your time to kick in. Intestines, relax. I don't know. They just like shot something in there that paused my digestive system, which gave me a huge amount of relief. And the position for going into a abdomen pelvis MRI is not the most comfortable. You have to be on your stomach and you have to have your arm extended this way because the IV is in it. They give you a little like squeezy stress ball that's connected to something in case you're having some sort of emergency, you need to get their attention. But I was basically like in a Superman position, like laying down on my stomach, arms stretched forward, and then my forehead like resting on my other arm with my little stress ball just in case I needed to squeeze it in this hand. And obviously the MRI machine is really, really loud. They give you earplugs and then they give you like special headphones. You can theoretically pick what music that you want to listen to as you're going through the procedure. But my radiology center, they did ask me, like, what do you want to listen to? I was like, obviously Taylor Swift. And they're like, oh, we just play Taylor Swift radio on Pandora. And they don't splurge for the premium. So basically, like, the first few minutes in the MRI, I was just listening to Pandora ads. And then they played You're Losing Me. And then they played, like, not Taylor Swift, just, like, pop music. But whatever, there are more important things in the world. And going into the MRI, the thing is, like, making a lot of noise, spinning around you or something. And there are periods where they will tell you to breathe in and hold your breath. They would maybe tell you to hold your breath for like 20 seconds at most. And it took like maybe 35 minutes total. I was out on my way, had to use the bathroom again about 3 times before I went home again. And that was my MRI experience. And I got the results the very next day. I was able to log in to like my little radiology portal, see all of the images. Didn't make no sense to me, but that very same day, my gastroenterologist had also received the images and she called me, and it was good news that they didn't find anything in the MRI that they didn't also see in the colonoscopy. So again, Goldilocks scenario. And so once my GI got those images, she called me, and now previously the biologic that my doctor had been advocating for me to get was Remicade. But actually now, at this point, a long time had passed since she had originally proposed the plan of me starting on Remicade infusions. And now she was coming to me. This is something that I super appreciate. This is a good doctor thing that she does. Originally, she had come to me with two options. She was like, Humira or Remicade. And I was like, I love that you're giving me options, because people don't tend to trust doctors. So I appreciate that your approach is to be collaborative with your patient. But given that, I'm just gonna let you pick. And she was like, yeah, I think that Remicade is better. And once again, she came to me with the options. She was like, we could do Remicade, but let me tell you a little bit about Skyrizi. She was like, given the way that your Crohn's presents, I think it's a very high likelihood that your insurance will approve Skyrizi. Here are the benefits of Skyrizi over Remicade. What she described to me really painted Skyrizi in most preferable light. She said that, I don't remember totally what she said versus what I looked up and found later about Skyrizi, except for the fact that she said the difference between Remicade and Skyrizi is that they target different parts of the immune system. Remicade, you would have to go into an infusion center every 8 weeks. Skyrizi, you do 3 loading doses of infusions at an infusion center, and then you get an OBI, an on-body injector, and you inject yourself every 8 weeks. And that takes 5 minutes, as opposed to the couple of hours that it would take to get a Remicade infusion every 8 weeks. But my doctor still wanted to give me the option either way, because there are some people who are like, no way, no how am I going to inject myself under any circumstances. I would much rather go to the infusion center and have it be done to me in a controlled environment, whatever. I was like, I don't really have a problem with that. It sounds like Skyrizi is a better option from what you're describing for me. But again, I'm gonna let you decide, because you're obviously the professional. And she was like, yes, I definitely think that Skyrizi is the better option for you. And we went down the process of asking my insurance so humbly to please approve this medication for me. And the most frustrating part is that this conversation happened the Friday before Christmas. So it ended up being a very, very long waiting game to hear back at every step of the process. And it was just fed to me in little crumbs. Actually, before Christmas, I got an email from Skyrizi, from AbbVie, and the Skyrizi Complete program, saying, hey, these are your login credentials. This is your nurse ambassador. Skyrizi is there for you. And I was like, but I didn't get any notification from my doctor or from my insurance or anything. When I called my doctor's office, they said they hadn't received a decision yet. And by the time that they called me to tell me that it in fact had been approved, it was the Friday before New Year's. And after you get the news that your insurance has approved a medication, a biologic, whatever, they still have to do a benefits investigation to see, okay, it's been authorized, it's been approved, but how much are they going to pay? What is your copay going to be? Then the next thing was I had to play phone tag a little bit with the infusion center. They would call me, I would miss a call, I would call them, I'd get their voicemail. But finally, the results are in, and I will be able to start my new, finally, biologic treatment protocol for my Crohn's disease at the end of January. My first infusion will be at the end of January. I will have 3 loading doses, the infusion in January, then a second infusion in February, a third infusion in March, and then I will begin to receive my little injectables to inject myself every 8 weeks. And I'm obviously really, really excited about this. I have been suffering with Crohn's potentially for as long as 10 years or my whole life, but certainly extremely acutely for the past 2 years. And it has been a battle to be able to fight for and finally get a really promising treatment option. Skyrizi is looking extremely promising for me. It actually was first put out on the market as a medication for psoriasis, and it apparently revolutionized the world of psoriasis. And it was only approved for use in moderate to severe Crohn's in adults in June of 2022, which was after my diagnosis. And the reason why that's actually exciting that it was approved so recently for use in Crohn's is because it was approved for use in Crohn's under more rigorous expectations for approval than previous medications. I watched this like hour-and-a-half long lecture webinar on new treatments for Crohn's and generally the importance of the gut mucosa. I'll link it below because it was extremely informative, extremely easy to follow, and made me really excited for the prospect of my treatment. Basically, the Cliff Notes takeaway from that for me was that there are basically two kinds of Crohn's remission. There's symptomatic remission and there is endoscopic remission. So the kind of remission where you don't experience any symptoms anymore, and the kind of a remission where when they scope you, they don't find any evidence of Crohn's in your intestine. And something that I learned in that webinar is that you can still have a diseased gut mucosa and not have any symptoms, which really makes me think about that period of time between my first colonoscopy at 15 and my second colonoscopy at 25, where I didn't have any digestional symptoms for the longest time, but I had extraintestinal symptoms associated with Crohn's. Just interesting. And that whole webinar goes into really how important the gut mucosa is. Super interesting to learn, but it's basically like a relatively recent finding how important the gut mucosa is. And so when other biologics and medications used to treat Crohn's were first approved, they were approved under the condition that they induce symptomatic remission. And they didn't need to prove that they could induce endoscopic remission. But Skyrizi is one of those medications that was approved on the basis that it does induce and maintain endoscopic remission. And you know, I always had the feeling in the back of my mind when things were going wrong with the insurance approval for Remicade, and I kind of, you know, lost that battle and had to end up going on azathioprine. I just always in the back of my mind was this lingering suspicion that none of this was going to resolve itself and essentially reach its happy ending until 2024, which on the one hand sounds super pessimistic, like, oh, whatever, things are going to be hard until 2024. That's just the gut feeling that I have. It's also sort of based on my progression chart because only in 2024 did I progress out of a moon conjunct Pluto aspect. So that was a large basis of my assumption, to be honest. So yeah, that might sound super pessimistic, like things are not going to work out. This immunosuppressant is not going to work for me, but it's also sort of optimistic, depending on the way that you look at it, because I was pretty convicted when I started azathioprine and I was not happy about it. I was like, I will not be on this by the time that 2024 rolls around. By the time that 2024 rolls around, there will be a new plan in place and I will be able to get my biologics. And that's exactly what happened. What amount of that can I attribute to my progress chart in astrology? What amount of that can I attribute to manifestation and the power of positive thinking or negative thinking, the concept that your thoughts become your reality? What amount of that can I attribute to pure coincidence? I don't know. All I can say is that I am super jazzed for what the future looks like for me in my Crohn's treatment. And once that process officially starts for me at the end of January, I plan on doing some videos documenting my experience with Skyrizi. You know, it is a newer medication on the market, and I always like to hear like people's personal real life experience with so many things, but especially when it comes to medical things. Before I ever had a colonoscopy, I was like looking up colonoscopy vlogs, experiences, etc. This was my first MRI this past month. I was looking up MRI experiences for Crohn's, vlogs, blah, blah, blah. And I haven't found any for Skyrizi. So be the change you wish to see in the world, baby. You best believe that I will be sharing my Skyrizi experience, and I'm looking forward to that. You can also expect the usual type of other content that you can find on this channel, more coaching videos, more personal development focused videos. I'm excited for the content that I have planned on this channel. I've also got so many things going on in my life in 2024, which is super exciting. So YouTube definitely isn't like my main focus, but I don't want to neglect it. And I'm excited also to share the things that I learn about and the ways that I grow in 2024. So if you've watched until this point, you might as well subscribe if you haven't already to keep up with my Crohn's updates and other exciting videos. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I hope that you had a wonderful, happy new year. If you haven't checked out the 12 Days of Wellness Miss and you're looking for a fun little binge, go ahead and check that playlist out. I also have a playlist dedicated to the videos that I make about Crohn's disease and chronic illness, so maybe you want to check that out. But that's all I have for you for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to speak to you again very, very soon. Bye.